credits so that we can lower the health care costs for 22 million Americans. Those Americans get that protection today. If the Republicans do not vote for that protection to be continued tomorrow, then 22 million Americans and their families are going to see a dramatic rise in their health care bills beginning the end of this year. This threat is looming for those families. It's 22 million Americans. By the way, it's 10 million Americans who either own small businesses or work in small businesses. So we're talking about Main Street, America. 10 million of the 22 million people actually work for small businesses in America. So for them, this is going to be a bill that they're going to be receiving in the mail. And we're talking Main Street America. We're talking Republicans turning Main Street into Pain Street for 10 million small business employees or owners. And tomorrow is the Republicans' opportunity not to see this dramatic rise, this skyrocketing price be passed on to them. And it's going to be devastating to them. These are not rich people. These small business workers, owners, no, they go week to week. They go month to month. These aren't big business people. These are small business. They're Main Street people. And they're about to get crushed. And that's the vote that the Republicans are going to cast tomorrow. It's going to lead to a $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $10,000 a year increase in the premiums that they have to pay for the coverage for their families. It is going to be devastating to those families. And the very fact, Mr. President, that President Trump and the Republicans are only just allowing a vote on continuing these critical tax credits just 2 weeks before all these families have to make their decision. It's only 2 weeks to go. And then they got to send a check in to get the coverage for January 1st. So the Republicans have waited until 2 weeks left to go. In Massachusetts, it's December 23rd. That's the last day. And people have to send in the check to cover. It's 2 days before Christmas. Can you imagine families, 22 million families, all trying to figure out how they're going to write that check for a dramatic increase in their health care 2 days before Christmas? That's what the Republicans are setting up across our country. 22 million Christmases who are all going to have this financial bomb go off on their kitchen table. It's going to make it harder to buy presents. It's going to make it harder for these families to plan for 2026. And it's all because these Republicans are unwilling to do it. And honestly, it just shows how unserious the Republicans are about addressing affordability for families at the kitchen table. The cost of living in this country is skyrocketing. And it's not just the health care bill for these 22 million people. Health care across the country is skyrocketing, just skyrocketing. And instead of trying to deal with it, the Republicans are doing nothing to solve the problem. And it's no surprise because the Republicans have harbored an ancient animosity towards all of these federal health care programs. The Republicans voted no on Social Security in 1935. They voted no on Medicare. They voted no on Medicaid. They voted no on the Affordable Care Act. Today, they're trying to destroy the vaccine regime that we have in our country. They're withholding by the billions research on cancer and Alzheimer's and diabetes and Parkinson's and other diseases that need more research. They're pulling back the funding for that. That's what they're leaving as a legacy for families this Christmas in our country. Because ultimately, health is the first wealth. That's what Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great Massachusetts poet, said. And that's what the Republicans are now trying to loot on behalf of their billionaire buddies, because all the money is just going to be shuffled off to billionaires. So this is, without question, just a continuation of their efforts, because they tried to stop Medicare, they tried to stop Social Security, they failed to kill the Affordable Care Act, and now they're trying to eliminate the tax credits that help people afford their health insurance. In Massachusetts, for example, it's 60,000 small businesses and their owners who rely on these tax credits to afford health insurance for themselves and their families. Now, here's what Trump says. Trump says affordability is a hoax. He's saying to these families, what you're now saying is a hoax. He's called affordability a con job. But the only hoax, the only con job is Trump and the Republicans repeatedly promising a cheaper alternative to the Affordable Care Act and instead offering nothing, absolutely nothing. That's where they're bent. The Affordable Care Act went on the books in 2010. For 15 years, they have been promising that they would have an alternative. There used to be a television show, Perry Mason, and he was a lawyer. He always had very difficult cases. And in the final 5 minutes of each one of the shows, Della Street, his great associate, she would show up with the critical evidence that would then solve the case. Well, it's been 15 years, and we've been waiting for the Republican Della Street to show up with the paper, with the document that's going to solve this healthcare crisis that the Republicans, with crocodile tears year after year, say that they care so much about. And they're not going to show up with a plan. There's a great play, Waiting for Godot. And of course, at the end of Waiting for Godot, Godot never shows up. And this healthcare solution that the Republicans have been promising for 15 years, it's not going to show up tomorrow. And as a result, 22 million Americans are going to lose their coverage. They're going to have to pay exorbitantly higher prices for the health care coverage than they do have to pay today. So this week, Trump, in a self-grading, exercise, he graded his economy an A+++++. That's 5 pluses that Donald Trump gave himself. But I think most Americans right now, they're giving him an F. Why? I'll tell you very simply. The cost of groceries is up. The cost of electricity is way up. The cost of housing is way up. And the cost of health care, because of Republicans, is way up. And they're even going to complicate it more tomorrow. They're going to have their own scarlet letter for the next year that they're going to have to walk around with, an H, a healthcare, on their forehead. They're just going to be branding themselves as opposed to providing the healthcare for all of these hard-working families across our country. And when the backbone of our economy, small businesses, can no longer afford their premiums, they will make tough decisions about hiring, about growing, or even closing their doors for good, turning, again, main streets all across our country into pain streets. And it's all going to be in the mail in just the next 2 weeks, right before Christmas. To me, it's almost unimaginable. It takes Scrooge and it gives a whole new meaning to it in terms of what they are about to deliver as coal in the stockings of 22 million American families. They were expecting a lot more, and that's not what they are about to receive. And so Despite the fact that these costs are going up under the Trump administration, despite the fact that they plundered $1 trillion from Medicaid just back in July to give a tax break to CEO billionaires, despite the fact that reckless tariffs are decimating our small businesses to the tune of $38 billion a year, somehow OMB Director Russell Vought wants to fund the Department of Defense at more than $1 trillion. Pete Hegseth declared it would be the Defense Department's first trillion-dollar budget. They're so proud. More nuclear weapons, more capacity just to blow up the whole world. Very proud of that. Very proud of the $1 trillion that they are now stealing from Medicaid, for the health care for every family that needs it. Very proud of the tax breaks by the trillions they're giving to billionaires and millionaires in our country. But when it comes to just making sure that people this Christmas don't see a dramatic spike in the price of health care for them and their families, they're going, sorry, I don't have any money. And there's a good reason. They're giving it to the Defense Department. They're giving it to millionaires and billionaires. Of course they don't have any money. And somebody has to pay for it. And the bill is going to be one that 22 million American families write to get their health care coverage for January 1st. And it's going to be a skyrocketingly higher number than it was just this week. So Donald Trump and his congressional Republicans, they just can't seem to find anything to help working families and grandma and grandpa, but they can find it for the billionaires. They can find it for the defense contractors. And you want to talk about waste, fraud? Just look at the defense budget. You just look at it. It's just loaded with waste and fraud. But they're not going to look there. They're looking at the pockets of ordinary families in our country, and they're going to tip them upside down and shake the money out of their pockets 2 days before Christmas and make them pay more money in order to get the health coverage which their family needs. So the Republicans just care more about wealth care than they do about health care. They care more about caring for the wealth of the richest than they do about the health care for every family in our country. And at every opportunity, Republicans are looting health care from families and small businesses in order to pay for tax breaks for people who already have too much. They're robbing the American people, and they're asking the Democrats to drive the getaway car. That we should be voting to take away health care from ordinary families to pay for these tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. But let me just say, right now, the Democrats refuse to be accomplices to this health care crime of destroying Americans' lives and their livelihoods and their health. The consequences are real, and they're happening right now. In the face of skyrocketing premiums, 10,000 people in Massachusetts have already dropped their affordable care coverage for next year. That's unbelievable. And there's going to be tens of thousands more who will be following them. That's just in Massachusetts. That's already double the number of residents who typically drop coverage in a year. And in Massachusetts, they have 2 more weeks to figure out whether or not they can afford this health care coverage next year. And the same thing is going to be true in 49 other states in our country and the District of Columbia. They're going to have to decide if they're going to keep their coverage at all. And for those who do keep it, it's going to skyrocket. And we don't know yet the final number of how many people are trading their good insurance for junk plans that have cheaper premiums but also have unaffordable deductibles. But we do know that working families will suffer while billionaires rake in the dough with great health care. Never have to worry about the billionaires in their health care. Never, in fact, giving money to build new wings on hospitals. They got so much money to make sure they and their families get the care they need at that hospital. But it's going to be unaffordable for the families who are going to be left behind right now. those families are going to be heading for emergency rooms. They're not going to be getting the kind of help which they need with their family's health care. So Trump told families last night they should give up pencils to deal with his affordability crisis. But Americans just can't give up health insurance when these tax credits expire. Who's going to suffer from Republicans' dogged opposition to lowering health care prices? I'm just going to tell you a few brief stories in Massachusetts. People like Jeffrey. Let me tell you who he is. He's a small business owner who is seeing his premiums increase by $8,400 next year. His wife died of cancer a decade ago, and by the time she passed, his family's medical bills had topped $1 million. They would have been crippled by debt without the Affordable Care Insurance policy, which they were able to receive through the ACA plan. But his bill's now going up $8,400. Jeffrey doesn't have that money. Second example, people like a couple out in Western Massachusetts whose annual premium is doubling from $15,000 a year to $30,000 a year. They're going to owe $1,000 more a month for their health insurance, which is going to be bigger than their mortgage. You hear what I'm saying, Republicans? For this couple, health insurance is going to double and be bigger than their mortgage. Is that really what you want to say to families across our country? Don't we have a plan in place already that protects them and gives them the health care which they need for their families? Give you a third one. People like a small business owner in Auburndale, whose premium is more than doubling to over $19,000 next year. And she cannot afford what she calls, quote, a painful blow to my budget. So she's just going to opt for a cheaper plan with less health care coverage for herself. She shouldn't have to make that choice. We already have a plan in place that protects her. She shouldn't have to go down in the amount of protection which she's receiving. And then we go to Jeff. Jeff lives in Natick, and Jeff has stage 4 lung cancer. And Jeff right now pays $30,000 a year to get the drugs which he needs. You know where his bill is going to as of December 31st, just 3 more weeks? I'm going to give you a second to think about it. His bill's going to $300,000 a year. And Jeff does not have $300,000 a year for his stage 4 lung cancer drugs. By the way, even as I'm telling these stories, there's 22 million of these stories that are all about to unfold a couple of days before Christmas, when people have to figure out how big is that new check they have to write off to get the coverage which they need. And I'll just tell you one final story, which is Laurie. She's from Truro. The premium for her and her husband is going to $6,000 a year, up to $26,000 a year. And Laurie and her husband, they can't get coverage through an employer and are a few years from qualifying for Medicare. So they're in a kind of a black hole. They're going to be left out in no man and woman's land, okay? That's where they're going to be. And they're going without insurance next year. That's the decision they're making. And they're hoping with fingers crossed, that neither one of them is going to have an emergency next year. Well, that's the Republican plan for Laurie and her husband. Just cross your fingers, pray that no health care catastrophe hits your family for a year, because they cannot afford $26,000 a year, up from $6,000 a year. So the Republicans are asking Americans to trade their health insurance for hope. But hope is not a health care strategy. The only thing that gives hope to families are actions which are taken to ensure that they have access to the health care which they need. And they are not going to take any action on the Republican side. And so Laurie and her husband are just going to forego health insurance next year, because $26,000 a year is just not affordable for them. So I'll just tell you, in conclusion, what Democrats are going to offer tomorrow. It's going to be a simple, straightforward extension of the health care tax credits these families depend on, so that families like this don't have to rely on hope alone. And my Republican colleagues, they're going to have a different plan. Instead of lowering people's premiums, they're going to give everyone $1,000 for their health care expenses. And that sounds nice in theory, but you already heard the stories of the people who are right now trying to figure out what they're going to do on December 23rd. Because they actually are not going to be allowed to use that money, the $1,000, to pay for their health insurance premiums. They're actually are not going to be able to use it for that purpose. So how is this Republican so-called health care plan going to help someone who works in a hardware store, who owes $12,000 a year in premiums, and has a $7,500 deductible? How does that $1,000 help anyone whose premiums will be $19,000 next year? How does $1,000 cover $19,000, which would have been covered? How does that $1,000 help a senior couple paying more for their insurance than for their mortgage? That's not a health care plan. That's a they don't care plan. And that's what the Republicans are offering up, a Republican we don't care plan for 22 million American families 2 days before Christmas. That's their plan. Their Make America Sick agenda does nothing to help the 337,000 residents of Massachusetts who are going to be confronting skyrocketing premiums next year, the 22 million people across the whole country. The only people that Republicans' plan will help are the millionaires and billionaires who already have the money to afford their premiums. And yes, their donations to Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans to protect those billionaire tax breaks. That's their plan. The ticking healthcare time bomb that Republicans are setting off, that Democrats have been warning about all year long, is about to go off. In Massachusetts, you got to write the check by December 23rd. And that check has to be written all across our country to make sure you're covered on January 1st. And this is as families are trying to get ready for their Christmas celebration. There won't be any celebrating in those homes. They're going to be trying to figure out how to balance their budget. They're going to be trying to figure out how to now deal with all that money that is now going to have to be spent on their health care that they did not have to spend this year. So this is going to be an absolute disaster for families. And it is avoidable, and the Republicans can avoid it. But instead, Trump and the MAGA Republicans, they've traded away health care for tax breaks for corporations. And it's the cruelty, the absolute cruelty of the Trump administration, which knows no limits. And just in time for the Christmas holidays, President Grinch is stealing medication from Dad, from inhalers for Grandma, insulin for children, toys right out from underneath the tree. So it is absolutely essential that we vote to extend the Affordable Care Act, premium tax credits. We must listen to the American people who are begging us to help lower costs. Tomorrow, we can do that on the Senate floor. I implore the Republicans to vote to extend these tax benefits for 22 million American families. Please do it for them. This is going to be a terrified of 22 million people. It's going to be a terrifying Christmas for these families. And it's going to be a terrifying reality next year when they've lost their health insurance or they cannot afford their health insurance unless they do so at the expense of all the other things which their families need. So we have to vote to avert this crisis. We need some Republicans to join us. Not many, but just enough with a conscience this Christmas to make sure that they are protected. So I thank you, Mr. President, and I just close once again by urging my colleagues to vote aye on our bill to protect those 22 million families. Thank you, Mr. President.
The Senate stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow.